Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me. My name is Delia Kay. I'm the Natural Resources Director for the town. I'm joined by Colleen Kouzis, Assistant Natural Resources Director, and our consultants from EA Engineering, Science and Technology, Alex Patterson, Project Manager and Ecologist, and Amy Hunt, Senior Engineer. The purpose of tonight's forum is to review the Warner's Pond Dredging Project background and goals, share information gathered as part of the dredging feasibility study, and explain the permitting process, anticipated dredging schedule, and obtain community input. Alex will lead off with a presentation. We're anticipating that will be about 20 minutes, followed by a Q&A session. With the exception of Alex, Amy, Colleen, and I, all screens will be turned off and mics muted. If you have a question or comment during the Q&A session, please use the raise hand function and you will be asked to unmute and turn on your camera one person at a time. This feature is in the Participants tab, which is down below on the lower part of your screen. Or you can hit Alt-Y on your keyboard. If you're calling in, and I see that there are a few people who are doing so, press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute and unmute on your phone. Please remember to identify yourself with your full name and address for the record. Following the Q&A, if there are questions or comments that come up following the presentation, or if you want to share this with people, we are recording it. You can send questions and comments to me. You'll see my email at the end, or you can mail them to me at 141 Kais Road. And remember also that there will be additional opportunity for public input at the permitting hearings that will be held with the Natural Resources Commission. And with that, I will turn it over to Alex.
Okay, great. So let me enough presentation. Delia, can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thanks, Delia, and thanks to everyone who is in attendance this evening. As Delia mentioned, my name is Alex Patterson from EA Engineering, and I'm managing EA services to the town of Concord as part of this phase of the project. So first, we'll just go through a little bit of background on Warner's Pond for those who aren't familiar. Warner's Pond is about 50 acres in size and is located in western Concord, very close to the Acton town line. The pond is an impoundment of Neshoba Brook, which means that it was created through the construction of a dam on the stream in the 1800s, and that dam was recently reconstructed in 2008. Historically, Warner's Pond has been a popular recreation area in Concord for uses including fishing and boating, and the pond is also a significant natural resource, providing a variety of habitats for native fish and wildlife species. So some background on how this project came to be. Some of you may be familiar with the term eutrophication, and eutrophication is a process by which lakes and ponds fill with sediment that makes its way into the pond from upstream tributaries or from direct runoff from the watershed. And this is a natural process that in natural systems occurs very gradually over the course of many, many years. And over time, the effect of this process is that what was originally an open water body like a lake or a pond gradually transitions to a deep marsh and then perhaps a shrub swamp and then ultimately a forest. And the reason that this happens is that sediments that make their way into the water body contain nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen, which fuel aquatic plant growth. And then as those aquatic plants grow and decompose, the nutrients from that biomass are released back into the pond sediments, which fuels even more plant growth. And that process continues over a long period of time until the water body gradually fills in. And again, this is a natural process that in glacially formed lakes or ponds that have little or no human development in the watershed would take many, many years. And in Warner's Pond, this process is happening much more quickly, both because the pond was made by humans through impounding Neshoba Brook, and also because of the large size and level of human development in the pond's watershed. And the addition of these nutrient-rich sediments has resulted in several observable effects in the pond, and the main ones are growth of dense aquatic invasive plant species and loss of open water habitats, which in turn degrades the recreational value and the ecological value of the pond. And these photos just provide kind of an example of that process. The photos on the top are just two satellite images taken from April and June to show the just sort of extent of aquatic plant growth that occurs in the pond even relatively early in the growing season. And then the bottom is just a photo showing plant growths that have occurred due to the addition of nutrient-rich sediments. And so the observation of these effects in Warner's Pond led the town to complete a watershed management plan in 2012. And the management plan had three primary components. The first was completing initial assessments of the pond to understand the nature of the problem. The second was to develop management goals to understand what the town ultimately wants from the pond. And then the third was to identify potential management options and recommendations. So in general, lake management options can be things that are done either directly in the pond or things that are done in the pond's watershed. And the graphic on the slide shows the location of Warner's Pond with the blue pin in the context of the pond's watershed in yellow. And so what this indicates is that all of the rivers and streams and lakes and wetlands within this yellow area ultimately flow directly into Warner's Pond. And so the size of the pond's watershed relative to the size of the pond itself is quite large. The ratio between their sizes is 612 to 1. And virtually the entire watershed is outside of Concord town limits. So the opportunities for managing issues at Warner's Pond through watershed management tools is very, very limited in this case. And because of that, in-pond management was recommended as the most feasible option for addressing the problems that we're finding at Warner's Pond. And the primary in-pond management technique for reversing the effects of eutrophication is the removal of nutrient-rich sediments through dredging. So as a follow-up to the watershed management plan, the town prepared a dredge feasibility study in 2018, which provided more details on what a dredge project at Warner's Pond would look like. And the plan focused on two separate areas within the pond that combined would remove about 36,000 cubic yards of sediment. And this number was chosen primarily to balance the ecological benefits of dredging with the temporary impacts and cost associated with undertaking this project. And so the plan recommended hydraulic dredging, which entails the use of a small barge with a suction device that removes sediment from the bottom of the pond and pumps it through a flexible hose to a dewatering area in a field next to the pond, in this case, where it is allowed to dewater. And then following dewatering, the material would be trucked to a field at the Northeastern Correctional Center property located just north of Warner's Pond. And so we'll go into a little more detail on what the dredge project will ultimately look like on the next couple of slides, but the project also includes improvements to the town-owned pond access off Commonwealth Ave. Primarily, these are related to improvements to the road surface and configuration, as well as stormwater and invasive species management. And so this slide just displays the locations of the various project components that I just mentioned, the two dredge areas, the temporary sediment dewatering and reuse areas, the Commonwealth Ave access, and then a portion of the dredge material will be reused within the pond basin to create a small emergent wetland shelf on the northern shoreline of the large island in the middle of the pond. And so this slide just shows some more detailed views from the preliminary design plans that were prepared in 2018. In the upper left, you see the pond, the northern and southern dredge areas, and the proposed emergent wetland shelf on the northern shoreline of Scout Island. On the right-hand side, just a closer view of the two dredge areas. And then in the bottom left, just sort of an idealized schematic of a hydraulic dredge operation with a small barge, a suction hose, which removes sediment, piped through a pipeline floating on the water surface, which discharges it into a containment area that allows the sediment to dewater. And so as the first step in the process for gaining regulatory approval for the project, the town submitted an environmental notification form under the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act, or MEPA. And after reviewing the materials that were submitted, the state determined that the town had sufficiently analyzed potential alternatives to the project, as well as the potential impacts, and that the project could move forward to permitting. And so that brings us to where we are now. Final designs, or permit level designs, excuse me, and completing the required permitting processes with the local, state, and federal agencies, and then preparing a set of final design plans, as well as specifications and a construction cost estimate that the town can use to put the project out for bid. And so just an overview of the anticipated schedule going forward, and a photo of a small hydraulic dredge barge that may be similar to what is ultimately used at Warner's Pond. And so just an overview of the steps in this process that we have just covered. Again, we're in the design and permitting phase, and we would be happy to address your questions and comments. As Delia mentioned, the wetlands application that will be filed with the Natural Resources Commission will entail one or more public hearings, which have the opportunity for additional public questions and comments. So if you think of something, don't feel that this is your only chance. With that, I will stop sharing. Turn it back over to you, Delia.
Thank you, Alex. We did receive one sort of we received some comments earlier that we'll just go through. And I do believe, Mr. McWilliams, that you're on the call. So what I would like to do is just go through and read the questions that you had. And then actually, no, what I think is better is if I share the screen and let people see what the comments are. And then we can go through each of these and address them for the group. So I think, so question 1 and 2, I think were addressed by the presentation. We do anticipate putting this out to bid over the summer and getting started in the fall. We obviously don't have an exact date, but fall 2022 is the anticipated start date, and we anticipate it will be a 6-month period. Hours of operation, the town has the ability to really dictate what that looks like to a contractor as part of the contract. We need to balance that with how quickly we want the work to be done, while being mindful of the sanity of anybody that might be affected by it. So typically what that would look like is, a 7 to 5 weekly, weekday operation, and, typically not work on the weekends. But that's up for discussion, and I'm open to hearing feedback on that, either tonight or via email. The next question is, will the dredging be completed prior to transfer? Let's get over here a little bit. Will the dredging be completed prior to transfer of dredged material, or will this be an ongoing process? And we don't want to dictate too much to the contractor how to do the work. And Alex, you might want to jump in here, but we're presuming that the dredging is going to be done, and then the material dewatered, and that will take some time for just the water to sort of come out of the material, and then it will be trucked off to another location on the NCI property.
Yeah, I think that's the idea, is that the dredging work would be completed in its entirety, and then at that point, the material dewatering would, obviously the material that's dredged will begin to dewater, but the process can't really be completed until all of the material is piped to the containment area. So at that point, the dewatering process would occur, and then the material would be trucked to the reuse location.
Your next question was on the dewatering and the location of that dewatering. Alex, maybe you want to pull up the graphic again showing that dewatering location, which that was identified as the initial dewatering location. And it was really just identified because it was the furthest away from the prison's farming operations. It would have had the least impact on their farming operations, but we also identified this as an issue as we advance the designs, because it does create a lot of impacts. As you note, it is in the floodplain. It's also within, wetlands and buffer zones. And so the idea is to move that dewatering location north of the pond in that triangular area there that Alex is just outlining. And that would be far less problematic in terms of wetland impacts. It would also address the concerns, Fred, that you had about the proximity of the location to the Bright Road residences. We're just waiting for confirmation from NCI Concord. We reached out to them a week or so ago to just make sure that this was acceptable, and and we're waiting to hear back. So that's the goal, to relocate that operation. You had a question that was related to the sediment control. Is that, let me just see. Sorry, odor controls. And Alex, I'm going to ask you to respond to the next couple of points that that Mr. McWilliams had brought up.
Sure. And if you'd like to reshare your screen, Delia, so we can all see those questions.
Yes.
But with regard to odor control, I think we are not anticipating that to be an issue that requires specific mitigation measures. About 80% of the material is sand, based on the grain size analysis that was done as part of the design for this project. And so while there is a thin layer of organic material, relatively speaking, on the surface, most of the material will be coarser grained and not nutrient or organic material. So I think between the location from the residences, which, as Delia mentioned, we're still waiting for final approval of relocating the dewatering area, combined with the results of the grain size and the idea that the work would likely occur in the winter when temperatures are lower and odor is less of a concern, should not have any concerns there. But if that proves not to be the case, then certainly the town will address those concerns as needed as they come up.
So I see, Fred, that you have your hand up. I am going to ask you to unmute, and is there a question on the question?
Well, yeah, it's really along the points of understanding what you consider to be a thin layer of organic material on a sediment of sand. My experiences personally in a lot of construction activities is that there's a significant amount of organic debris that exists. And being that the fact that we do have a lot of invasive species, the fact that they are proliferating in that area lends support to the fact that there's a lot more organic material there than I think is being led to believe. And, I think, fortunately, as you already stated, being in winter time, the impact of the smells and everything else from the decay of the organic debris on shore is going to be certainly mitigated. I think there's a lot more there than you give credit for. I think it's going to be quite significant, personally, in my experiences. But with that said, the aspect of operating in the winter, I think, will mitigate that significantly. Although I'm kind of surprised that operating in the winter, you're actually going to be able to be effective, considering the fact that the pond does freeze pretty solid across the entire area. So I'm not quite sure how well you're going to be able to operate throughout the winter time in that. So that's my primary comment on that.
Thank you. Alex, I don't know if there's anything additional that you want to add, but I would just note that the analysis of what the material is came from testing what the materials are with some sediments coring. So that's where that information is coming from.
Yep.
Would you like to continue through the comments here? Let me share my screen again.
Sure. So there were some questions or comments about dust mitigation as well. Obviously the the material that is dredged from the pond is going to be primarily water. And so the material will be dewatered prior to transporting it to the final reuse location. However, we would still expect the material to be, not dewatered to the point that fugitive dust escaping from the stockpile would be a concern. I think the primary concern for dust would likely be just the trucks driving on the farm road to and from the dewatering area. And that can likely be mitigated just by placing stone temporarily on that farm road to provide a more stable access location for those dump trucks. And so the next comment was, or I guess a question about whether the dewatering operation will be active or passive. We are anticipating that the dewatering would occur through gravity draining of the water from the stockpile into a sump that will be constructed at the lowest point in the dewatering containment area. And then the water would again travel by gravity into sort of an energy dissipation area, going through various levels of siltation removal before it is allowed to drain back into the pond. There may be a need for dewatering pumps, and we're going to leave that up to the contractor to have that flexibility if that's needed. But initially, we are anticipating that the dewatering would occur via gravity. So the next question or comment is addresses a few different topics. I think one thing, just to be clear, is that when we are referring to material to be reused on site, that refers only to the material used to construct the wetland shelf on the shoreline of Scout Island. Any other material not used as part of that component of the project will be removed from the field and trucked to the final reuse location. So there will not be any material left in the dewatering area following the completion of the project. And with respect to the 100-year floodplain, as we mentioned, the original dewatering area that was conceived is located in the 100-year floodplain. But even if that area were to be used, the material will be removed by the end of the project, such that there's no change in the grade. However, the more northerly area, which we are waiting to gain approval for, is located entirely outside of the 100-year floodplain.
Thanks, Alex. I see that Mr. Brewer, you have your hand up. If you'd like to unmute and on camera, please let us know what your question is.
Hi, thanks to Fred McWilliams for bringing this all to our attention on both Wright Road and the surrounding streets. And to your earlier point, Delia, on if the town finds that, or if the residents around the local area find that where the harvest is dumped is essentially unsatisfactory, then the town will deal with it. I want to submit that that's way too late, because if it's smells too bad, or for whatever reason we find that it's not in the right location, that's far too late at that point for the town with a very limited budget to be able to deal with it. And that's why I think it's extremely important in this planning stage to make sure that it is far enough away from all of the neighborhoods involved. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comment. So I think what I was trying to suggest was if there are odor concerns that are associated with sediments that are not anticipated at this time, that the location would not necessarily change, but what would change is whether there were procedures or protocols in place that would address those. And that can certainly be something that we build into the contract specifications, and it would be that would be something that is part of how this project would proceed. I'm just gonna see if I can pull up on here the GIS where we can take a look and just measure off that distance, which is several hundred feet. If we are, if we get approval from the prison.
Yeah,
to
I've got,
put the dredge location in the place that we would like to put it in a minute. Don't know why, but okay. Well, I'll share that again. Are you able to see this screen of the aerial?
No, I still see the questions.
Okay, let me just do it like this. So here's Wright Road here. And where we would like to have the dredge is the closest limit would be about 900 feet away from that location. So, that's just contextual. It would be very difficult, as I think you note, Mr. Brewer, to change the location of the dewatering once it's been identified. I don't think that would be anticipated, but what we would do is make sure that if there was any odor that was emanating from the spoil pile, that it would be controlled.
I think we would be very interested in having that identified before this all takes place. So, we know what mitigation plans would be able to be done.
Okay, thank you. Colleen or Alex, just let's see, Beverly Ridpath, I see your hand up.
Do you want my name and address?
Yes, thank you. I forgot to remind people about that. Yes, thanks.
Beverly Bryant, 175 Conant Street. Since this pond was originally set up with a pail factory, I believe, or something like that, and that it is wanting to be used for swimming, have you done testing on the sediment for heavy metals and for hydrocarbons? Do you know if there's a toxic load buried down there in the sediment that may not need to be disturbed, or, where are you with that process?
So there has been testing done of the sediments for heavy metals. There was one high hit of arsenic, which needs to be reevaluated. The prison is only going to accept the materials if they're clean. So we do need to do some reanalysis of that sediment. I don't believe, Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe they were tested for hydrocarbons. But yes, I mean, it is critical to know what those sediments are composed of. And we do have, that's in the dredging feasibility study, which is available on our website, the 2018 dredging feasibility study.
So it'll be addressed as you go along.
Yes, so as part of the permitting process, I expect that DEP will require that additional that there's some additional analysis of that high hit of arsenic. And again, Alex,
Yeah, so
jump in
just to,
anytime.
I'll just add to what you said, Delia. So
Thank you.
the sediment sampling was done initially as part of the watershed management plan in 2012, and then again in a more concentrated fashion for the dredge feasibility study in 2018. And that sampling did include a variety of metals. It did include hydrocarbons as well as other potential contaminants that DEP regulates for dredging projects. So the sampling was done specifically to support the dredging project, and the sampling plan was prepared in accordance with the procedures that DEP requires. So of the few dozen analytes that were sampled for at the dozen or so locations within the two dredge areas, there was one location where we had one exceedance of a criteria for arsenic. There were no other analytes that exceeded any of the threshold values in any of the other samples. And so, as Delia mentioned, we will be engaging in a process with DEP to determine what type of analysis needs to be done to further support the permitting for that. With regard to your question, though, about the pond itself, you know, while the dredging process will temporarily disturb sediments such that they're suspended in the water column shortly after the end of the dredging, you know, those sediments will settle back down into the pond. So there wouldn't be a concern for, you know, making contamination worse, so to speak, as a result of the dredging in the pond.
Right, as long as it's clean enough for kids to swim in, I guess. Thanks.
And so that's a question. I mean, you know, we have always looked at this as a recreational improvement because of the high level of invasives that make it almost impassable for paddlers once the invasives come in by June, really. And also ecological improvements to the, you know, improving the oxygen capacity, the dissolved oxygen that's available in the ponds for fish, and, you know, then for, you know, wildlife that prey on the fish, and the whole chain. So I think, yes, I think that's, I'm afraid I've lost my train of thought there, Beverly. So I will come back to that. I see that Enid, you haven't commented yet. So if you'd like to unmute and on camera, we would love to hear your comments.
Okay, I'm not sure how to get myself on the camera. Okay. As I understand it, you're planning to dredge from the public landing on Comm Ave across the bottom of Scout Island.
Oops. I'm so sorry, Enid. I'm so sorry. I just muted you by mistake. I meant to
Okay.
lower your hands. I apologize.
Okay.
Sorry.
The overgrowth around or all around the Scout Island is incredible. So, and of course, I'm on Losbrook Road and I'm close to the dam. I'm at the dam end of the pond. And every year we see the weeds going further and further and further. Eventually they're going to blanket the water. It'll be as bad as it is around Scout. So I guess my question is, but the dredging that you're going to do is what the town can afford. I know a 50-acre pond is a bit much to do the whole thing, but how is that going to stop the encroachment and the rest of it? I mean, I don't see how just doing one little area is going to improve the quality of the whole pond.
Sure. Well, that's a good observation. And let me share my screen again so we can all see the pond. So the southern dredge area roughly is something like this, and then the northern dredge area roughly is something like that. And so it's very true that on the northern and western sides of Scout Island, sort of in here and here, we have very dense growths of aquatic plants and even woody plants that are growing all year round because water depths are so low that woody plants are now able to survive and grow in these areas. And the reason for that is that the pond's tributary, Neshoba Brook, enters the pond right at that location. And so the vast majority of sediments that are coming in, or at least a lot of them, are accumulating sort of here. And that's why when you look at an aerial, you can see that, from April to June, the portion of the pond that is most impacted by invasive species growths is right here. And so why would we not want to dredge there if it's the most impacted area? And the reason is because sediment continues to flow into Warner Pond and will continue to do so for as long as the pond exists. And part of the town's goal is to provide as much benefit as possible for as long as possible. And so that means we want the dredge project to have a lifetime that will be as long as we can possibly make it. And if we were to remove sediments from the area that I've outlined and deepen that area, the addition of new nutrient-rich sediments to the ponds that's happening every day would very quickly cause the area to fill back up, and the project would essentially have been for very little. The plan to dredge this area is primarily because by siting the dredge on the opposite side of Scout Island, which acts to direct water flows around to the north, and then by also constructing the wetland shelf on the northern shoreline of Scout Island, we hope to extend the lifetime of the dredging for as long as possible by sort of protecting the dredge basin from incoming sediments. And so the project certainly will not completely address the invasive species issue at Warner's Pond. There will continue to be invasive, certainly, but it will improve water quality, recreational opportunities, and habitat for fish and wildlife, while balancing some of the other considerations that come into play on any dredge project.
Thank you, Alex. Sue Felshin, I see that you have your hand up and you have not yet had a chance to speak. Would you like to jump in?
Yes, thank you. I have 3 questions. First of all, the dewatered materials will be shipped to the temporary storage site by what, excuse me, they'll be shipped there for dewatering by what truck route? I'm wondering if they'll be going by Lawsbrook or if they'll be going through the Rotary. I realize it will be, or will they be going by the Bristol and Rail Trail in some fashion? My second question is, when I moved into town over a quarter century ago, there was informal access to the pond by Sunnyside Lane or Pond Street, which has gotten entirely overgrown, and who cares because the pond is in such poor condition. But after this dredging, the pond would actually be paddleable from that point. And I wonder if there's any idea of restoring some kind of pond access, no matter how informal, just to carry down a canoe or a kayak, or even just to take a look. And my third question, so I hesitate to bring this up because the former neighbor I heard this from was hardly reliable, but I was told that decades ago, someone who lived in the area and worked for StarMet, which was Nuclear Metals at the time, used to go out in a rowboat and dump barrels over the side. And so I wonder if any of the tests involved things that might have come from Nuclear Metals. And again, I don't want to give this too much credence because it's not a reliable rumor, but I just wonder. Also, the dredging system will involve a pipe, so for sucking materials out. So perhaps it's moot because it won't be dragging against any old barrels, even if there were any. But those are my three questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So let me share my screen again, and so that we can take another look at the pond. And so just to clarify, the dewatering area is going to be in one of these two fields next to the pond. And so the way that the material is going to get to those fields from the pond is via a flexible hose, one end of which will be attached to a hydraulic dredge barge, and the other end will be within the containment area. And so the sediment will be pumped directly there to dewater. And then from there, the material will be trucked to the final reuse location. We are still finalizing the truck route. The initial idea was to have the trucks come down Commonwealth Ave and Lawsbrook Road and all the way around due to the one-way nature of Route 2. However, the truck route has been revised so that trucks will turn around on Route 2 about a mile or so west of this location and avoid the need to go down Commonwealth Ave or the other neighborhoods to surrounding the pond.
Wait, how will it get there in the first place?
I'm sorry?
But they can't turn left to get onto Route 2. So how will they get from the site?
So from the site, they would have to turn right on Route 2, and then they would either use the rotary or potentially a U-turn for authorized vehicles only to access the reuse area. And then from there, they turn right again on Route 2 to head west, and then make a U-turn off the page to come back to the site. The final truck route will be displayed on the project plans that are submitted. So we're finalizing that, and we'll have that nailed down once the permit applications are submitted. Your second question related to the access from Pond Street, I'll let Delia address, but your third question about contaminants, as I mentioned previously, the sediment sampling that was conducted was done in consultation with DEP, testing for the standard suite of contaminants that would be regulated for a freshwater dredge project. So I'm not sure what contaminants you think may be there or not, but
probably depleted uranium, because that's what StarMet is infamous for. But honestly, I couldn't tell you better than that.
Okay. And that's not something that is typically included in sediment analysis for dredging. And so I don't believe uranium was tested for as part of the sediment sampling.
Yeah, so I've never heard that before. That's a new one for me. So thank you. We will follow up on that. And in regards to the Pond Street access, it has, you're right, it has become overgrown as the pond has filled in on that southern side. It has just become, the access has also become overgrown. So we would work to open that back up again. So that, because that will be within the area that is proposed for dredging. We would love to see people be able to use that again to get
I
into
would
the
like to
pond.
point out that since Sunnyside, the north end of Sunnyside is about to be developed, maybe there's an opportunity to work with the developer to restore the access that used to come off of Sunnyside.
Good point. Thank you. Let's see. I'm going to ask Phil Brewer if you have another comment that you would like to make, and then to you, Mr. McWilliams.
I do, and thanks again. Just to be clear, we're very much in favor of the dredging operation and just want to make sure that it's done in a way that has the least impact on our immediate area. As I sit here right now, since our property backs onto Warner Pond from where we are at 132 Wright Road, if I turn my head slightly, I'm looking right out at Warner Pond in the dark with an almost full moon right ahead of me. So we really enjoy it as a resource and would like to see it protected as much as possible, and appreciate the efforts of all to make this a best case effort for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. McWilliams.
Thank you. I want to echo Phil's comment and the fact that, yeah, we're not opposed to dredging operations at all. It has nothing to do with that at all. In fact, the reality is that Warner's Pond is almost on the ecological collapse at this point. I've been here about 50 years and canoeing and recreating on this property in the pond for quite some time. And it is getting really, really bad shape. So we actually applaud the effort. I do have questions with respect to the extent and the breadth of the dredging operations, and the fact that one would think that it would be a little bit more extensive to really have a solid impact. And to your point that you made, Alex, you're talking about the fact that you didn't want to necessarily do the outflow of the Neshoba Brook into the area, but yet that is where the nutrient-rich materials are coming from. And in fact, if you look to the area to the west, and if you don't mind if I could share the screen, Dilla, I appreciate it. I pull up a Google Earth here. Would that be permissible?
Okay.
I am not sure if I can do that from this set here. Okay, very
You
good.
can?
I will do so. All right. There you go. So I don't have my pointer up, but I'm not sure if you can see my little hand waving here. If you can do that.
Yes.
Good. So the nature of Neshoba Brook, which feeds into the area, currently is shown here, and it shows this kind of sort of a tributary to this end. The original flow of Neshoba Brook actually extended down beyond here through this area, back up into this area before it actually discharged out to Neshoba Brook. So Neshoba Brook out to Warner's Pond. So it turns out that the actual path of Neshoba Brook has changed over the years. And in fact, I would probably say the last 10 years is pretty much where a lot of these changes have happened, most of which is a result of beaver action. So there's been a lot of beaver action. This whole area was all open in terms of wetlands. It's filled in pretty much, but that's sort of some of the normal nature of things. But what really concerns me is the fact that this area and this area right here is not being addressed. And with respect to the shelf that you're proposing here, interesting enough, this is the actual main channel flow of the original Neshoba Brook around the island. So I'm kind of surprised that you'd want to put a shelf here that would actually block the natural flow of the water here. So I'm curious as to the comments in that regard. But I would personally prefer a much larger area within the scope of budget be explored for, a larger dredging area. So thank you for the comments. We're good.
Thank you.
Well, again, I think it's certainly true that dredging more of the pond would help to remove more nutrient-rich sediments and have more of an impact on invasive species growths. But the reality is that the extent that can be dredged is really a balancing act between the need to do something and the cost of the work. As far as the area north and west of Scout Island, again, I would just say that dredging that area would, I would say, be not a judicious use of the town's resources, only because we know that sediment loading into Warner's Pond is occurring at a very high rate. And, the concept of dredging at the mouth of the pond's tributary would really just be providing an opportunity for that area to fill in relatively rapidly and really would not do much to improve water quality or recreation in the long term. So, that's sort of why, again, the dredge area is where it is. And the wetland shelf, again, is really meant to both reuse some of the dredge material at the site and sort of act as an area for incoming sediments to accrete before they come around Scout Island and refill that basin. Because the fact is that we can't stop sediment from coming into the pond. It's going to continue to flow in. That's just a given. And so where the sediment ends up and where we dredge is really the things that we can control. And so the dredge areas were chosen to try to extend the lifetime of the project and provide the greatest benefit for the cost as possible.
Thanks for that response, Alex. And I would, I think that's right. And when we had initially asked the consultants to, we said, hey, let's dredge Warner's Pond. And they said the size of the pond and the amount of dredge material that you're looking at is, it is just not a feasible number to be working with. And so we said, okay, well, we have the 47-acre ponds. Where are we going to get the most bang for our buck? And those locations beyond the areas where the pond, so think about like a river when it's flowing merrily along, it's carrying sediments along with it, a little bed load, and then it hits the pond and everything, it just drops out. So that's always going to happen. And so that's why those locations on the southern side of the pond were selected as the areas of having the most efficient use of the funds that we have to allocate towards this dredging. I see that there's a couple of hands up. Ellen Glendon, you've had your hand up for a little bit. Enid, you are next, and then John Coleman after that. So Ellen, please unmute a mic on camera. Let us know what your questions or comments are, please.
Hi, I'm Ellen. I'm at 64 Stoneroot Lane. I may not have heard correctly, but I understood that you're going to be dredging in the winter and you're going to be planning on the dewatering to occur then, therefore, in the winter. But won't it freeze and therefore not dewater? That's just a general question. Again, in the spring it will sort of melt through, But it really has more to do with the side comment, at least which was that the contractor could determine whether they needed to run some pumps to help with the dewatering. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes.
So in my experience, having just lived through the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail being put through beside our house, that things that are left to the contractor to decide are often not in the best interest of the local abutters. And I would just suggest, Delia, that maybe we could make sure, or the people who, that it could be clearly outlined as to what would be the, how many pumps, when would they run? So, because I'm just thinking the volume of noise with many of these kinds of projects can become exponentially voluminous as it bounces off various elements. So yes, it should be up to the contractor, and I completely understand that. But our contractor decided to go several hundreds of feet down the railroad path and rip out iron railing because that's what he needed to do, but it was not in the plan. And I just think that the more we can be aware of things that are within the contractor's purview, and we can put some delineation around those elements, the better off we as town people are. Thank you.
Sure.
You, Ellen?
I certainly agree with your comment there. You know, it's always kind of a balancing act to put some guardrails on what the contractor can do versus providing them with the flexibility that they need to address issues that may arise after the project is awarded and after the work starts that may not have been foreseen, or other things that were thought of as possibilities that end up becoming eventualities. So we certainly do want to have the contractor to have the flexibility to use pumps to dewater the material, because not having that option at all would risk the material not being dewatered in time to get it out of the field. With that being said, there are certainly things that can be done to, I think, address some of your concerns, one of which would be specifying certain times of day that pumps can be run, specifying potentially a maximum number of pumps or horsepower as far as noise is concerned. And then with regard to just the physical area, you know, in this case, because there are so many permits needed, there's going to be a lot of regulatory scrutiny on this project, and we do need to very clearly define the limits of the work. And for the purposes of the dewatering site, that includes just the boundaries of the containment area, as well as the access road going to it. And the contractors won't be going anywhere beyond that, closer to the residences near the area. So hopefully that addresses some of your concerns, and when the permit applications are filed, hopefully you find that some of those items are addressed there.
Great, thank you, Alex. Enid?
About 1 million years ago, or maybe it was more like 25 or 30 years ago, I was on a town committee for the pond, Warner Pond Committee. And at that time, we were talking about, the dam had not been rebuilt, obviously. And we were talking about the need to rebuild the dam because the drawdown mechanism no longer worked. That if we had a new dam and a drawdown mechanism, that they could draw down the water, that there was an herbicide that could be put on the invasives that presumably would not kill the fish and any other creatures that live there. But is that still a possibility? Because the dredging, as productive as it is a limited area.
So the problem with the the flush rate of the pond is very rapid.
Mm.
You know, so water comes into the pond from Neshoba Brook at the mouth of the, you know, where it comes into the pond, it cycles through, it's gone within 24 hours. So it makes it very challenging for herbicide control to be effective without a lot of manipulation. So this is why we are looking at the dredging.
Yeah.
And I fully anticipate, Enid, that once the dredging operations are complete, that we'll resume those activities for the water chestnut hand removal. We'll have, you know, better ability to be able to do that. I'm fairly sure that the crew was out there this summer doing some removal, but it's just so vast right now.
Yeah.
Which you know far better than I
overwhelming.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
it's
overwhelming.
overwhelming. So,
Yeah.
you know, but I would love to get back to the point where we can work with the community to get those volunteer days, you know, get people out and pulling out the chestnut and, you know,
And the water
milfoil and-
lilies. The water lilies.
Yes, yes, yes. So that will be what we will work
Okay.
towards.
Thank you.
Thank you. John Coleman, good evening.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm at 65 Central Street. My questions relate to contaminants in the sediment that might be there. You've mentioned that samples were taken and submitted as required, but I was wondering what the analyses would be for and whether samples were just taken from the surface or from throughout the cores or different places in cores, how many cores? Because usually behind dams, the sediments do have contaminants and it often stops a project. I was just wondering how this one got by or what the results are looking like in that regard.
Sure. So as I mentioned, the initial sort of screening level sediment sampling was conducted as part of the watershed management plan in 2012. And then once dredging was recommended and dredge areas within the pond were identified, a more targeted sediment sampling program was completed to support the dredge feasibility study in 2018. And the locations of those sediment samples, as well as the results of the analyses, are all provided in that report, which is available on the town's website. But just to summarize what was done, and for a little context, the 401 Water Quality Certification Program, which is a regulatory process administered by DEP, is the primary regulatory program that ensures that any dredging work or disposal of dredge material is done in accordance with established regulations with respect to material contamination. And so the sediment sampling program that was done was based on DEP rules and regulations for how many sediment cores need to be collected based on the amount of material that's being removed, where they need to be collected, and what potential contaminants need to be tested for. And so that work has been completed. As I mentioned, there were a number of different contaminants that were tested for, including metals, hydrocarbons, other volatile organics. And one sediment sample did have an exceedance of the state criteria for arsenic, which is actually very common to find for freshwater dredge projects. Arsenic and lead are typically the two potential contaminants that will exceed thresholds if there are any, just because arsenic is a naturally occurring element in the Earth's crust, and lead was obviously used very widely in leaded gasoline and lead paint for many years. and is often found throughout the environment in aquatic systems. And so while there was one exceedance of arsenic in one of the sediment samples that was collected, the average concentration is still well below the established criteria. And so as part of the permitting process for the project, we will be consulting with DEP to determine whether any additional analysis of those results or any additional sampling is required. And then once the material is dredged and dewatered prior to trucking it to the final reuse location, additional testing will be required to confirm the final levels of contaminants in the material, if any.
Great, thank you, Alex. Gary, I see that you have your hand raised. Good evening.
Hi, thanks, Delia. Gary Kleiman, 57 Central Street, right next door to John Coleman, who just asked a question. Hi, John. But also on the NRC. And I had a question based on the comment that was just raised about water chestnut. I'm wondering if as part of this dredging activity, will there be any plans to try and, I don't know, maybe perhaps more aggressively remove some of the invasives that may be in the immediate vicinity of the dredging area, so that citizen initiatives like these volunteer days to remove water chestnuts at least have a leg up or some kind of advantage? Is there a way that, well, we have heavy machinery in place. Can we get a little headway before we, I don't know, I'm just asking.
So it's a great question. And, the challenge with, some of the invasives, there's milfoil and fanwort, and those invasives are encouraged when they're broken up. So if, many years ago, I think maybe before it was really sort of understood that that was problematic, there was I think it was a harvester in the early 2000s or late 90s that was put into the pond. And it takes out, I mean, the water chestnut is effectively removed by the harvester, but those smaller, weaker stems, invasives, they just break into fragments, and they love that, and they flourish. And so I think we need to be careful about that. We need to think about how we do that. And simply by the dredge removal of those materials and placing those into an upland area, letting them dry out, and then moving them to another upland area, that biomass is being taken out of the ponds, just within that dredge area itself. So there's that benefit. And if there's ways that we can think about increasing our ability to get those out, let's brainstorm and let's brainstorm and get it done. It's a great idea. Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, thanks.
I don't see any other hands up. I will note, I just want to say thank you to everybody. These have been really great questions, and thank you to Alex for an excellent presentation. I think we both mentioned that this will be coming for a permit through the Natural Resources Commission. We anticipate that will be filed for the December 1st meeting. So please feel free to come back and ask questions or listen to that presentation. And also, if you have additional questions or comments, you can email me at dkaye@concordma.gov. Hi, Fred. I see that your hand is raised. Please jump on in.
Thank you very much. Even though we didn't get through all the questions I had written before, which is fine, I just want to comment to the fact that if you're looking at moving the stockpile area further to the north, when are we going to find out? Do we have an opportunity to comment on that? Because even though my comments had, there was an extensive number of comments, my greatest concern was really the impact on the floodplain. Because as it stands, we are protected, particularly in the lower part of Wright Road, by the mere fact that that entire farmland operates as our floodplain. And I have seen a significant amount of flooding that has occurred in the floodplain area that has not, as a result, has not affected lower Wright Road. If we impact the elevation or the grade associated with that floodplain, then we're actually putting all lower Wright Road at risk for flooding. And that is probably my largest central concern that I have. Because everything else, odor, dust, whatever, those are temporal in nature. But something like this is a more permanent change, and that could massively affect us in the long run. And I just want to make sure that that is appropriately addressed, and looking maybe at higher elevation depositions, staging areas, whatever. And I did present a couple of those things. So if you could provide that to the consultants, that would be fantastic.
Thank you. I did share your emails with the consultant.
Very good.
And it would be temporary. In any case, it would be temporary. And we will have, by the time that the notice of intent is filed for the December 1st hearing, we will have the answer to that question. I mean, that's our full intention, is to have the dewatering area be in that northern area that Alex identified on the plans.
Yeah, I mean, even in, it's not within the scope of your scheduling plan, but even locating temporarily on the Giroux property would allow quicker access to Comm Ave and then to the final disposition site on the CMLP land. So that's also something to consider as well.
The Giroux parcel, unfortunately, is not large enough. So we need about close to 4.5 acres, 4 plus or minus acres for the dredge.
Yeah, I figured that.
Yeah, and so you'd have to take trees out to put it onto the Giroux parcel. So that's a challenge. But the prison, they've been very willing to work with us, and we're grateful for that. We're just trying to get that confirmation, but we should have that soon.
All right. And the only other comment I have is in the natural process, because again, this is going to be winter time. There's going to be holdups and whatever. Everything is, the intent is to actually minimize disruption of that area. But the reality is there are always project delays. There might be holdups. Let's say, for example, in the overburden pile that you generate from the sediment, that you do post-sediment sampling in that pile, and you find out that, hey, we ain't got an exceedance, then what do you do with that material? Everything is on hold at that point. So developing those contingencies and the further impact that would have on that floodplain does need to be taken a look at some point. So if these could be looked at and addressed, and how this would happen, particularly with regards to contingency planning, that would be fantastic.
Thank you for that comment. That's great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I think this was a really helpful discussion, and we have some good comments from all of you. Good points to consider as we're moving forward with permitting documents. And as I said, if you have any additional thoughts or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thanks, Delia.
Have a great night, everybody.